Welcome back, everyone. I'm Ellen.
And I'm Alyssa.
And this is 2024 Our Story. And today we have a very special guest. Anais, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Anais, and I started off interested as being an anthropology major, but now I'm thinking about either double majoring as a Chicana Latinx study major or double majoring.
That is so cool. What class made you decide that you might want to change your majors, do a double?
So currently I'm taking a class called Fandango as a decolonial tool with Professor Martha Gonzalez, and it's actually a really fun class. Like, we get to learn by still engaging by learning different dances. She has us sing, which is, I wasn't expecting. I was a little nerve-wracking at first, but I actually feel like really connected to like the subject, and I find a lot of ways to like connect my culture, and it's really fun sharing like whatever I learned with my family. So
I'm glad that you got to take a class that just like opened everything up.
Thanks. Yeah, it's really fun. And the professor, she's so sweet, and she makes the class so personal, which is awesome.
That is amazing. Wow. All right. Well, we will have to talk about that later because I want to learn more about that class. But today, Alyssa, would you like to introduce what we will be talking about?
Okay, so today we're going to be talking about being at a PWI, which is, I guess, stands for primarily white institute.
Yeah. So according to the Urban Dictionary, which is our favorite, PWI stands for predominantly white institution, as Alyssa already said. And so thinking about PWIs, what comes to mind when you hear that term?
It was something that, like, in high school, I never really thought of as much, like being what a predominantly white institution is, to be honest. It wasn't really something I was exposed to until I started taking college tours. And the only tours I actually took were at the Claremont colleges. I took a tour at Pitzer, Pomona, and Scripps. And it wasn't until I took a tour I realized I was like the only Latina in the tour groups. And then the rest were mainly like white people and then like a couple Asians. And that was so that was a big cultural shock for me, because at least for my high school, it's like primarily the Latina population. So that was really that was kind of like a weird transition for me.
Yeah, definitely. In the end, did that shock and the experience of realizing that these schools were PWIs impact your decisions, or when you were making a decision, did it like add in a different element that you had to consider?
To be honest, most of the schools I was looking at were more private schools, so I knew like no matter where I went, most likely than not, it was going to be a PWI. It wasn't really something that came off as intimidating to me, as I know some people like might feel like uncomfortable with the transition, but I just knew it was something that would come off as an adjustment. But I remember when everyone was on social media introducing themselves like on Facebook or Instagram. It was like also another big culture shock that like mostly like the white students are coming from like private boarding schools. And I didn't know boarding schools existed in the United States. Like, I just saw them in movies and like people in London going to boarding schools. And I was like shocked to see how many people were coming from this private boarding school experience. And like when I saw that was kind of like intimidating to me for a little bit. And yeah, that was like a big thing that kind of like made me feel a little bit wavered.
That's very true. I also did not realize how big boarding schools were until like we started talking with people from our class. Like, there are so many who attended boarding schools, and you're right, the only way I'd ever seen them portrayed was like in movies.
I loved the idea of, not the idea of being not at home, but just the idea of like boarding schools sounded so cool to me. But I did also picture boarding schools in like London, and everyone has accents, and I guess it was a change, but it's kind of cool that they're in the US as well.
What do you think of when you hear PWI, Alyssa?
Well, I'm from the Bay Area, just like you, Ellen. And I think race has always been a little bit like strange for me in my experience, just because I attended a bilingual Montessori school when I was very, very young. So that was pretty much all either Chinese, Japanese, or like a handful of white people. So I am half Chinese, half German. So just like growing up in that setting for like so many years of my life, I really didn't notice. Like I didn't think about like how many white people are in the area because I was just surrounded by just a lot of Asian culture. So I was shocked when I went to public school that there was like a lot more diverse people. And I think that still in high school, going to a charter school, I think there still were, I think it was predominantly white, but still a lot of Asian people, some Latino people. I don't think that there were very many Black people in my school, but just I think diversity it's more, I think, in the Bay Area in general than other parts, especially in the US. But I don't know, it is a little bit of a shock to me going to a predominantly white institute just because I am still not used to that. So yeah, what about you, Ellen?
You basically cover. Okay, so Alyssa and I, we have already discussed how similar our experiences were in elementary through high school. I attended a private a Mandarin bilingual school for elementary school, and those classes were extremely small. They were predominantly Asian, specifically Chinese, with like also a handful of white students. But it was such a small school that I never went to public school, or I guess charter school was considered public school, but it was still smaller. It wasn't like the entire population of the area. And so for most of my life, I was very much encapsulated in like this Asian bubble where I really only interacted with like other usually Asian females. And it was really weird to me when I started middle school, I think, because then my range of who I was interacting with on a daily scale really expanded. And now that we're in this PWI, it's weird to me to think there's a much bigger white population within the school. But compared to you, Alyssa, I don't think that I've really felt that switch yet. I think that being on Zoom has really kept me from really mentally processing the fact that like I just won't see as many people who look like me when we're on campus. And do you guys feel like you've felt or seen the same thing?
I'm definitely on the same page with you, Ellen. I feel like it hasn't become as obvious as it may have been on campus, but I do remember like first semester, maybe like 2 or 3 weeks into the semester, I was just curious. I was just like looking around at like everyone's names like in the core class. And I was like, wow, like no one has really like a Latina or Hispanic last name other than like just one other person. And then there was just like 2 Asian people and the rest were white. And I was like that. And I was just like the rest of the Zoom class, I was just kind of like, oh my gosh, like how did I not notice that before? And I think it's something that would have been much more clear if we were on campus. But other than that, I really haven't felt like a big shift either, mainly because it's on Zoom.
I think what has kind of made me realize it just a little bit more is that I'm taking Chinese classes. So I took a Chinese course at Pomona last semester, and I'm taking one this semester as well. And I think that in the past, when I took Chinese courses, it was either through, my bilingual school where everybody was pretty much Chinese, or a couple of white people. And then I took a community college class as well in high school of Chinese, and that was also filled with mostly Chinese people. So people who had more of a background, I guess, in speaking the language at home. So I think that going into my Chinese class and seeing that it was predominantly white students taking the course was just really, I think the only moment where I was like, wow, it's definitely a little bit of a shift. I don't consider it a bad thing. I thought it was pretty interesting, and I thought that it was really cool that people were trying to learn different languages, because I think in high school, a lot of the time, people who were taking Chinese courses were maybe being a little bit pressured by their parents to do so because they already spoke it at home, or they wanted to make sure they didn't lose it, or they spoke Cantonese and they wanted to learn Mandarin. So I think that was mostly the reason why I noticed it a little bit quicker, but I just thought that was pretty interesting.
That is really interesting. Now I'm curious, Anais, do you feel like there's a greater Latinx population attending that cultural class than like attending the core classes that we're in?
Oh yeah, most definitely. And it's really interesting when we like reflect on our experiences to connect it to the material, like how similar our upbringing has been in terms of like identifying with our culture or like our family. And it's a really like comfortable setting, like even on Zoom. And like I can only imagine how great the class would be in person. Even though like in high school it was a primarily like Latino population, like we didn't really get that many opportunities to talk about like our culture or understanding the culture in the same way that I get to do now. So it's still a little different than like my experience from high school, but yeah, I love it.
Okay, so I wasn't exactly sure how to word this question just because I personally don't have much experience with CLORGS so far, and I don't really know that many of them right now. But I was just wondering, are there any clubs or organizations that you find helpful while attending a PWI? And do you think it's important for schools to kind of not push, but just leave it as an opportunity for students of similar backgrounds to connect with each other?
Yeah, so first semester I signed up for a group called Café con Leche, and that's like a Chicano Latinx identity group. And it was really helpful because they would like give advice, and then they also kind of like sent out maybe like a Google sheet or a Google form where we're all able to like write down or list the names of classes we were taking, so that if we had any similar classes, like we could reach out to each other and help each other. And I actually found a couple of people that I could connect with. And then one student, I'm now taking the like Fandango's a decolonial tool course again. So it's really nice. My mom like kept pushing me to join the Café con Leche. And like sometimes like with my mom, I'm just like, no, like I don't have to do it. But I'm actually like really glad I joined, because even they have like a mentor that will reach out to you and like provide any like mental health resources or like any guidance that you need that maybe I wouldn't have known of otherwise. But yeah, I think joining an identity-based group is really helpful, especially at a PWI, because I feel like even without realizing it, sometimes you can like feel like isolated. So I definitely like would recommend anyone to join like an identity-based group.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And especially when we're on Zoom, it's another way to connect with people. But yeah, I've joined I've been going to meetings for the Asian American Sponsor program, and then I signed up for the Asian American Student Union, but I don't think I've gone to any of their meetings just because I don't know when they are. So I should get on that. But yeah, I meet with my sponsor group has 2 mentors who are upperclassmen. So like a group of 5 of us meet every week just to talk about life and get advice and everything, which has been very nice. And it's another way to kind of get to know the campus when we're not there, and to build connections with people who just have have similar but other experiences that we can just talk about and really get to know each other through. And I've gotten to know some really nice people through that. So that's been really nice. But yeah, I think I definitely agree with Anais. I think it's important, or these identity-based groups are important to really bring people together when it feels like there's that culture shock you were kind of talking about, and just to help ground yourself and realize that you're not the only one who may be feeling that.
Yeah, and I think especially as first years, I feel it's really hard to get to know people really like on a personal connection on Zoom. So I feel like those identity-based groups also really help with that. And it's also like really comforting to know like when I go back on campus, I do have those resources, and like I do have that help from people who like I might not know well, but they're just like so open and willing to be there for you.
Yeah, definitely. And since we're on the topic of returning back to campus, do you think that you'll get a different vibe, like in terms of being at a PWI, than you are right now?
I definitely think that the living situation might definitely be a big shift. I'm honestly not really sure what to expect, but just because I'm not familiar with like that situation whatsoever, it's definitely going to be something new. But like something I like the closest thing I can think to relate to it is because I'm Mexican, and majority of my friends are actually Asian. And so it's kind of weird. Like sometimes I go to their house, and if we're like all making food together, like I go in the fridge, and for some reason I expect like tortillas in there, even though they're Asian. And like that's always like so weird to me. And I feel like that's like the closest thing I can think of how it's going to be like a big cultural shift going on campus, but just like heightened, I suppose. I know that's like a really weird comparison, but that's just always what I think of when I think about moving onto campus.
That is so interesting. When I think of like the living situation, for some reason, the first thing that comes into my head is like in my Asian household, like we take our shoes off before we go into the house. And I know that most people don't do that. And it's just, it's going to be really weird to me to like have that conversation with a roommate that like, I'm going to take my shoes off. Maybe we should take our shoes off. I don't know. We'll see what that turns into.
Yeah, Ellen, that was the first thing that came to my mind. We also in my house we wear kind of like indoor slippers. Like we don't just really we take off our shoes, and then we also have these slippers that we have just like to walk around the house to kind of, I don't know, keep it cleaner. And I do think that I am also used to being in a lot of Asian households because a lot of my friends are Asian. I think just because of growing up with a lot of Asian culture, a lot of that is kind of ingrained into my daily life, and that would be very strange to have people. I can't imagine somebody like wearing shoes and like sitting in bed or something. I feel like I've seen that in a movie, and I remember being super bothered by it. Like that's just, to me, that seems really unhygienic.
Completely feel you. Yeah, definitely. What were the demographics of your high school? Do you have an idea of what?
I don't know like exactly. I think I definitely went to what was considered like a medium-sized school. It was about 1,700 students. Definitely primarily Latino, the Latino population. Like that was the main one. And then I think that what followed that was Asians, and then whites, and then blacks, and then maybe it's like Middle Eastern. So like definitely like white people were considered the minority at my school. So it's definitely like whenever I really think about it, how I was considered the majority at my high school, and now I'm like a minority at a PW. Like that's definitely like a weird concept for me, because I feel like minority often it has kind of like this idea, like it kind of has like a negative connotation sometimes. And like sometimes it just like doesn't sit right with me to be like, oh, I'm a minority. Just because, I don't know, I just feel like I said, it has like a negative connotation to it. And it kind of gives this connotation that like, oh, you don't have like as many resources, like you're not like as privileged. And like in some cases, yeah, that's true. And I feel like sometimes that can be like disempowering for some people. And I feel like that's also kind of like a mental shift that comes with being at a PWI, like understanding that like, yes, I'm like the minority, I'm not part of the dominant majority, but like I can still accomplish like whatever they're doing. Like I still have the same capabilities, like no matter what my background is, I'm able to accomplish whatever I can set my mind to.
So eloquent. Oh my goodness.
It was very inspirational.
It is. I'm so glad we had you on here.
Oh, thanks. In my head, I was like, I hope what I'm saying makes sense.
It completely does.
Something I have like reflected on a little bit though is like in terms of like roommates, like would I feel more comfortable with having a roommate that I can share like a similar cultural background with, and like would I feel somewhat isolated if I had or like shared a room with someone who didn't share the same culture? that was something I kind of like pondered at for a little bit.
That's a
Yeah.
very good point. I hadn't even considered that when we were talking. You like brought up residential life, and I was like, oh my goodness, I didn't even think of that. Yeah, that's a very good point. I think, honestly, I wonder if when we get back, if we'll have triples, and in that case, what the situation's gonna be like. And like, I feel like having 3 people versus 2 people in our room, and in like their cultural backgrounds and where they come from, has a different shift in like the feeling and the vibes there than there would be if there were just 2 people. Based on like what you're thinking about now, would you prefer to have someone who shares a cultural background or similar experiences?
I think maybe in terms of like the environment, it would almost kind of be like I feel like it could be kind of be like a breath of fresh air because it's something like familiar while you're being away from home. But like I also just like love learning about new cultures that I don't think I would be opposed to sharing a room with someone who maybe isn't Mexican or like has like or identifies with like a Latino culture or Hispanic culture. But like there's also just something like very like comforting about having someone that you can share like a similar background, like similar stories. Like whenever like I'm in my like more cultural class, like it's always just kind of like, oh, like I can relate to that. Like that's, you know, it's like you automatically have that connection. So I feel like that's something very special. So yeah, I don't think I have like a very like clear answer, but it's something I've definitely like thought about.
Yeah. I was just wondering I mean, I'm not very familiar with the process of getting a roommate and rooming with people yet. Fingers crossed for next fall. But I do wonder what they kind of take into account when trying to put people together, especially since I guess people may have different feelings about wanting to be with people who have similar background to them. Or not. So I don't know. That's not really a question that I think we can answer here because I don't think any of us know right now. But that is something that I'm kind of interested to see because I guess we'll see in the future if hopefully when we're still doing this podcast, we can answer our past questions. So future us, we can take it away.
Yes, cue the episode 50 in advance.
Yeah, we can play back this clip and then it'll work.
Yes. I do think that we all had to fill out that ResLife survey though, but I think that they do it based on like your wake up time and all of the cleanliness and that. I think that's the main focus.
How accurate can those cleanliness things be? I mean, when you have to rate yourself, I'm really like, I'm curious. Are people honest? How do you know? I don't know. What I consider cleanly may not be the same as everybody else.
On a scale of 1 to 10, where would you rate yourself, Alyssa?
I'm not sure. I'm weird about it. I really get bothered by like certain things and I do want everything to be nice and tidy, but I also don't keep my room's pretty clean. I always tell my friends like, oh, don't come in, it's messy, but they're like, no, it's fine. But I think I just like have clothes sometimes on like my bed, like a little pile of clothes that I move from my bed to my chair, my bed to my chair. I think that's pretty much the worst thing about my room. So I consider myself pretty cleanly. I don't know. Sorry, this is so off topic.
Yeah. I would rate myself a 7, just answering my own question. But
oh yeah, 7's good.
Yeah, I feel like that's in the middle. Sorry, off topic again. But the last thing that I wanted to say was that before we came into Scripps, I think what I generally thought of for roommates was like kind of, I know this is not the case for many people, but I think of them as like a built-in friend at first, or someone that like you can go to dinner with because you're all in the same room and you're like at orientation and everything, you like get to know each other there. And so honestly, I think it would be nice to have someone who's different or who has different experiences from you there, definitely. And then especially in parallel with having a cultural based group group where you can make connections with other people who share backgrounds and different like ideas and histories, I think the combination of that would be nice. But then again, there is also that question of like living like dynamics and everything. Well, that's all we have for everyone today. Thank you so much for listening in. And Anais, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was so much fun. And I think we really got a lot out of this conversation. So
Definitely. I think it's a really important conversation, especially when you're at a PWI.
Yeah, so tune into next time's episode, you guys. And thank you. Bye.
Bye.